Welcome back, my amazing family. If you love explosive stories about past regrets, massive betrayals, and the incredible, undeniable power of second chances, you are in the exact right place. Before we dive into this deeply emotional journey of redemption, please subscribe to our channel, smash that like button, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's jump into The Billionaire's Hidden Daughters. The Billionaire's Hidden Daughters. A costly mistake. He aggressively accused her of stealing and violently threw her out into the freezing night. Exactly 4 agonizing years later, he vividly, horrifyingly saw with his own 2 eyes exactly 2 identical little girls standing completely by her side. The massive city completely outside Owen Carlyle's luxury executive office aggressively buzzed with blinding light and pure, unadulterated ambition. But securely inside the towering glass skyscraper that proudly housed his massive, global pharmaceutical empire, absolutely everything felt incredibly sharp, freezing cold, and completely, utterly controlled. He confidently stood directly by the massive, floor-to-ceiling window of his Manhattan penthouse office, staring intensely down at the sprawling skyline that had stopped genuinely impressing him a very long time ago. His dark blonde hair was flawlessly, perfectly styled. His piercing blue eyes were incredibly cold and utterly unreadable. His bespoke, $10,000 tailored suit clung aggressively to his muscular body, exactly like highly polished, impenetrable armor. Owen was exactly 36 years old. A completely self-made, highly ruthless multi-billionaire, deeply revered in elite corporate circles, and fiercely, violently feared by his massive competitors. Pure human emotion to him was incredibly inefficient. Blind trust was a highly dangerous luxury, and massive mistakes were absolutely, permanently unforgivable. The highly confidential email aggressively arrived just exactly before 7 p.m., boldly marked as strictly urgent, directly by his elite chief of internal audits. Massive discrepancies in the highly secure financial reports, hundreds of highly flagged, irregular transactions, tens of thousands of dollars, discreetly, illegally moved over the course of several agonizing months. A highly aggressive, preliminary federal investigation had ruthlessly narrowed the massive search down to someone entirely within his own highly private, personal circle. When he violently opened the final, highly encrypted attachment and clearly saw the name Selena Morris aggressively highlighted in bright, toxic red, something massive and completely frozen violently hardened deep inside his chest. His sharp jaw aggressively clenched, and completely without stopping for a single microsecond to logically consider absolutely any alternatives, he violently snatched his expensive phone and rapidly dialed her number. Selena arrived happily at the massive penthouse that evening, only to surprisingly find the heavy front door completely wide open. She walked cautiously inside. Her expensive designer heels echoed softly, rhythmically against the pristine Italian marble floor. She physically, vividly, felt the highly toxic, thick tension in the heavy air long before she even saw him. He was standing completely rigid in the center of the grand living room, her name already freezing cold and highly bitter in his mouth. "I blindly, fiercely trusted you," he stated aggressively, completely devoid of any polite greeting. "And you have been actively, maliciously stealing from me." She stood completely, utterly frozen. Her dark, beautiful hair was casually, softly pulled back. Her gorgeous eyes widened massively in pure, unadulterated disbelief. "What the hell are you even talking about? Do absolutely not play the pathetic innocent with me," he violently snapped. The highly secure accounting logs explicitly, undeniably, show massive missing funds. Illegal wire transfers aggressively traced directly to your highly secure login credentials. She took a highly cautious step forward, her soft hand slightly raised in a desperate gesture of peace, acting exactly as if she were desperately approaching a highly dangerous wounded wild animal. Owen, I absolutely do not know exactly what they supposedly found, but I absolutely did not illegally take a single damn thing. I absolutely never, ever would. No! He violently interrupted her, his voice echoing loudly in the massive room. You are absolutely not just anyone. You happily lived securely here. You possessed highly privileged access to my entire, massive life, and you maliciously, aggressively used it. Her voice completely broke. Her rapid breathing became incredibly shallow. Do you honestly, truly believe that I would violently betray you like that? I strongly believe that the massive, undeniable evidence fiercely speaks completely for itself. She stared intensely at him, utterly, completely stunned. For one highly agonizing microsecond, something massive violently flickered deep behind her beautiful eyes. It absolutely wasn't blinding anger. It wasn't pathetic panic. It was a highly quiet, completely absolute devastation. I genuinely, foolishly thought you truly knew me significantly better than this, she whispered incredibly softly. Clearly, I absolutely did not, he responded coldly, exactly like pure ice. The heavy, suffocating silence that violently followed was utterly unbearable. Exactly like the highly terrifying, static seconds right before a massive, violent hurricane. She absolutely did not cry. She absolutely did not pathetically beg. She simply, smoothly turned around and confidently walked directly into the massive master bedroom. She rapidly, efficiently, packed her minimal personal belongings completely into a small, cheap travel bag, and confidently returned entirely without uttering a single additional word. As she proudly walked right past him, he absolutely did not move a single inch. He absolutely did not pathetically ask her to stay. He didn't even bother to look directly at her. Right at the heavy front door, she completely stopped. One day, you will profoundly, agonizingly realize exactly what you violently lost. Then she proudly walked completely out. The heavy deadbolt violently clicked shut, directly behind her. Highly definitive, completely resonant. Owen remained standing completely motionless, his massive fists aggressively clenched completely at his sides. He absolutely did not speak to a single other soul that entire night. He absolutely did not violently reread the massive financial reports, nor did he aggressively demand further federal clarifications. He arrogantly, blindly told himself that he had flawlessly done the absolute right thing, aggressively cutting out the toxic rot long before it could violently spread. But something massive completely failed to properly fit. It absolutely wasn't deep guilt. It was something infinitely colder, significantly heavier, something exactly like a terrifying, suffocating silence. What he absolutely, catastrophically did not know was that Selena absolutely had not just walked out with a cheap, small suitcase that tragic night. She had walked out heavily carrying exactly 2 tiny, fragile lives deep inside her. Absolutely still, incredibly tiny, and completely silent. Beautifully, miraculously growing directly beneath her shattered heart. And by the exact time he would finally, desperately arrive to actually question exactly what had truly, genuinely happened, it would be way too incredibly, agonizingly late to violently stop the massive, explosive unfolding of the entire tragic story. Owen accused Selena of theft and kicked her out. Would you ever forgive someone who threw you out without proof? Tell us below. The haunting silence and the revelation. Exactly 4 agonizing years had violently passed, but Owen absolutely never, ever permitted his highly disciplined mind to actively return to that horrific night. He had aggressively buried it. Exactly as he violently buried absolutely everything that made him feel incredibly insecure, deeply buried underneath massive corporate achievements, explosive quarterly financial results, and completely endless, massive global projects. Selena's beautiful name absolutely never, ever crossed his lips, neither in highly public settings nor in extreme private. According entirely to the elite world, she had completely, permanently vanished, and Owen had ruthlessly, effortlessly moved completely on. But a massive, terrifying part of the deep silence she violently left behind had absolutely never stopped aggressively following him. Not entirely. It aggressively lingered completely in the massive, empty spaces she arrogantly used to fill, in the perfectly untouched, freezing cold side of the massive king bed, in the beautiful, soft music she happily played in the bright mornings. In the highly specific, toxic way, he absolutely no longer permitted anyone to ever get incredibly close to him. Now, in the bright early spring of 2025, Owen was currently in Boston for a highly exclusive, elite corporate gala, aggressively representing his massive company's explosive expansion entirely into advanced biotechnological research. It was the exact, boring type of elite event he had previously attended exactly 100 agonizing times. Highly rigid, fake conversations, ridiculously expensive, vintage wine. Highly predictable, pathetic compliments entirely from greedy people who desperately needed his powerful signature. After exactly 3 agonizing hours of highly forced, polite smiles and perfectly rehearsed corporate speeches, he aggressively slipped out incredibly early. He walked completely alone directly toward the freezing sidewalk, his expensive phone securely in his hand, fully ready to rapidly call his private chauffeur. And that was exactly when he vividly, violently saw her. Selena was standing perfectly still, directly beneath the bright glare of an old street lamp, just a few short yards away, desperately attempting to rapidly pull a small toy completely out of her large purse. And exactly 2 identical tiny little girls were fiercely clinging entirely to each side of her. At absolute first, Owen remained completely, utterly paralyzed, arrogantly thinking that the striking resemblance was aggressively playing a highly cruel, toxic trick entirely on his tired mind. But it absolutely wasn't a pathetic mistake. It was undeniably, absolutely her. Her highly graceful posture, the flawless shape of her beautiful face, the incredible, gentle softness with which she gracefully kneeled completely down to carefully zip up one of the tiny girl's colorful jackets. It was undeniably her, and the 2 tiny girls, they looked to be roughly exactly 3 years old, perhaps a tiny bit older, utterly, completely identical, incredibly tiny, laughing brightly, fiercely hugging plush, stuffed animals. Both possessed incredibly soft, beautiful blonde curls and massive, bright blue eyes. His exact, piercing blue eyes. He absolutely did not move. He literally, physically, couldn't. The entire massive world completely around him went violently dark as he stared intensely. His ragged breath completely, terrifyingly trapped entirely between his burning lungs and his dry throat. One of the tiny girls slowly looked up and stared directly at him for one fleeting, highly curious microsecond. She blinked incredibly slowly, highly curiously. Then, She happily looked completely back at her mother without saying a single word. Selena slowly stood up, completely straight, and naturally followed her young daughter's innocent gaze. Their eyes violently, explosively met. She absolutely did not gasp. She absolutely did not stumble in shock. She simply, calmly looked directly at him, with a highly tranquil, completely unreadable expression. Exactly as if she had meticulously, fiercely prepared for this exact, terrifying moment for years, and was completely, entirely done with it. Owen slowly opened his mouth, but absolutely zero words managed to escape. Before he could desperately find absolutely anything intelligent to say, Selena smoothly, gently guided the two tiny girls directly into a waiting, yellow taxi cab. She absolutely did not rush frantically. She absolutely did not cowardly look back. Two tiny, highly identical faces pressed. Two tiny, highly identical faces pressed firmly against the back window, intensely watching the massive city rapidly blur completely around them. Owen remained completely, utterly motionless. Utterly, completely still. While highly busy people rapidly walked right past him on the crowded sidewalk, completely unaware that his entire, massive universe had just violently, permanently shifted completely off its axis. He honestly wasn't exactly sure how incredibly long he stood frozen there before his elite chauffeur cautiously approached and politely asked if he was fully ready to safely leave. He slowly nodded, his piercing eyes absolutely still violently fixed entirely on the dark street where the taxi had completely vanished. Something massive completely inside him, something highly toxic that he had aggressively buried exactly 4 agonizing years ago had violently, aggressively surged completely to the absolute surface. And he profoundly knew, with absolute terrifying certainty, completely without desperately needing a single person to legally confirm it for him. He had literally just vividly seen his biological daughters for the absolute, very first time. The search and the first encounter. Owen literally could not sleep a single wink that entire night. He aggressively, frantically paced the massive luxury hotel suite, obsessively, violently reliving the highly shocking scene over and over again, entirely in his racing mind. Selena directly under the bright street lamp, the identical twins fiercely clinging to her side. The highly fleeting, explosive moment when their eyes had violently met, and the absolute, terrifying expression on her beautiful face. Not massive surprise, not pathetic regret, not blinding anger, just a highly tranquil, freezing distance. He could absolutely still vividly see the exact way the tiny girl had intensely looked at him. The slight, highly curious tilt of her tiny head, exactly as if she were intensely looking directly into a strange mirror that completely made absolutely zero logical sense. He absolutely did not desperately need highly official, federal DNA proofs. The girls were 100%, undeniably, his. He profoundly knew it in a massive way that completely, violently transcended basic human logic, striking directly, forcefully into the massive part of him that had been completely, utterly empty for 4 agonizing years. By the absolute break of morning, he had aggressively made his massive decision. He absolutely did not desperately contact her directly. He profoundly knew she would absolutely not respond. Not after exactly what had brutally happened. Instead, he highly discreetly hired a massive, elite private investigator he had successfully worked with on highly complex corporate matters before. He absolutely did not want highly aggressive surveillance or toxic pressure. He simply wanted an exact, accurate address. Something incredibly simple. Something deeply human. In exactly 3 short days, he successfully had it. A highly modest, comfortable townhouse, safely located in an incredibly quiet, peaceful neighborhood in Cambridge. Absolutely nothing highly extravagant. Absolutely not the specific type of place Owen arrogantly imagined Selena would eventually end up. But perhaps that was the absolute, entire point. She had successfully, flawlessly rebuilt her entire life completely without his massive money. It was a highly quiet Tuesday afternoon. He absolutely didn't explicitly tell anyone at the massive corporate office. He absolutely didn't even inform his elite chauffeur. He aggressively rented an inconspicuous car, parked silently at the absolute end of the peaceful street, and sat completely frozen for almost exactly 20 agonizing minutes, intensely watching the tiny, colorful front yard, meticulously observing the cheap plastic toys scattered randomly across the green lawn, the highly colorful chalk drawings completely covering the sidewalk. A tiny, bright red tricycle flipped carelessly on its side, a tiny, adorable pair of little shoes left right near the front steps. It was a beautiful life, a highly complete, incredibly beautiful, happy life that he was absolutely, completely no part of. Finally, he confidently stepped out and walked slowly directly toward the heavy front door. When she finally opened it, she absolutely did not seem completely surprised. She simply looked incredibly tired, exactly as if she had profoundly known that this highly terrifying moment would eventually arrive and had fiercely prepared herself for it. "Owen," she stated simply. "I desperately need to fiercely talk to you," he replied. His deep voice was highly calm, but completely inside. Absolutely everything was violently trembling. Selena absolutely did not politely invite him inside. She confidently stepped completely out onto the small porch and gently, firmly closed the heavy door completely behind her. The beautiful, joyful sound of children's pure laughter was heavily muffled, completely in the background. "You absolutely shouldn't be here," she stated firmly. "I vividly saw you, directly outside the luxury restaurant." "The tiny girls are my biological daughters," she stated with an incredibly firm, absolute tone. "They are absolutely mine, too," he stated quietly. And she absolutely did not violently correct him. For one long, agonizing moment, she intensely studied him. He looked incredibly exhausted, but absolutely not in the exact same toxic way as when they were actively together. It was a completely different, highly profound type of exhaustion, exactly as if he had been blindly sleepwalking completely through life, completely on autopilot, and had literally just violently woken up. "Why exactly now?" she asked. "Because I absolutely did not know," he stated defensively. "If I had absolutely known—" "You absolutely didn't want to know," she violently interrupted him. "You were so incredibly, blindly fast to arrogantly believe that I was a pathetic thief. You absolutely didn't even allow me to fiercely speak. I made a massive, catastrophic mistake. You violently, ruthlessly destroyed absolutely everything we beautifully had. I was heavily pregnant when you violently threw me out, Owen. I was actively carrying your biological children, and you absolutely didn't even bother to look back." The heavy words violently hit him exactly like a massive bucket of freezing ice water. He physically felt it deeply in his chest. A massive weight so incredibly profound that he literally struggled to successfully breathe. "I am absolutely not here to pathetically justify exactly what I brutally did," he stated incredibly softly after a highly long, agonizing pause. "I just desperately want to magically fix things. Somehow. And exactly what does that arrogantly look like to you? Massive amounts of money? Elite, expensive lawyers? a highly polished corporate press release. I desperately want to be their true father. Selena slowly looked down, took a massive, deep breath, and then looked directly, fiercely into his piercing eyes. They absolutely do not know you. They have absolutely never even heard your actual name. You absolutely cannot simply arrogantly arrive and violently claim a massive title that you absolutely never, ever earned. Then fiercely allow me to aggressively earn it, he stated with a highly low voice, almost a fragile whisper. Please, just allow me to begin. She did absolutely not respond immediately. The heavy door directly behind her slightly creaked open, and one of the tiny girls curiously peeked completely out. Selena rapidly spun around and gently, lovingly guided her safely back inside. When she finally turned completely back to Owen, her beautiful face had slightly, miraculously softened. I absolutely promise you nothing. But if you genuinely, truly want to aggressively do this, you fiercely start entirely with them, absolutely not with me. I completely understand. Owen, she fiercely added, her voice suddenly incredibly sharp and highly absolute. Do absolutely not do this half-heartedly. If you aggressively step in, you permanently stay. He nodded incredibly slowly. The massive, profound gravity of exactly what she truly meant settled heavily entirely into his very bones. This absolutely wasn't a pathetic, grand gesture. This absolutely wasn't something that could be easily fixed with a massive check or a highly publicized apology. If he desperately wanted to actually be in their beautiful lives, he absolutely had to fiercely earn it with massive time, with absolute presence, with infinite, unbreakable patience. She slowly stepped backward directly toward the door. Come back exactly on Saturday. We will be actively at the small park exactly 2 blocks away at exactly 10 a.m. Before he could even attempt to answer, she smoothly slipped completely inside. The heavy door loudly clicked completely shut, directly behind her. Owen stood completely frozen there for an incredibly long time, absolutely motionless, intensely staring at the exact spot where she had just been standing. For the absolute first time in exactly 4 agonizing years, he profoundly felt something completely unknown. Massive humility. And completely beneath that, a massive, blinding spark of pure hope. Owen wants to earn his place as a father. Do you think it's possible to fix such a huge mistake? Tell us what you would do. The first steps. The small, highly colorful playground was incredibly modest, perfectly hidden completely between 2 massive apartment buildings, featuring a heavily faded wooden fence and the beautiful, crisp scent of fresh spring completely in the air. Owen arrived exactly 10 minutes incredibly early. He was awkwardly dressed in highly casual jeans and a simple sweater he absolutely hadn't worn in agonizing years, completely unsure if he was way too incredibly overdressed or absolutely not dressed enough. He stood highly awkwardly right near a wooden bench with his massive hands shoved deeply in his pockets, aggressively scanning the entire area exactly like a highly lost man who had violently wandered into a completely foreign place meant entirely for someone else. Tiny children ran wildly in highly energetic circles, their pure laughter incredibly bright and completely free. Happy parents happily chatted loudly nearby while casually sipping hot coffee from cheap paper cups. Owen physically felt exactly like a massive, highly toxic intruder, a terrifying man completely out of place among cheap strollers and colorful sidewalk chalk. At exactly 10 a.m. sharp, he vividly saw them. Selena approached with a highly slow, completely even pace. Exactly one hand gently, firmly holding on to each of the tiny girls. They were flawlessly wearing matching, pastel-colored spring jackets, Their beautiful blonde curls happily bounced with every single tiny step, and their tiny sneakers brightly lit up entirely as they walked. They looked completely around with highly wide, massive eyes, taking in the small playground exactly as if it were a completely brand new universe. When they successfully reached the small gate, Selena gracefully kneeled completely down and whispered something incredibly softly directly to them. Both tiny girls nodded fiercely. Then, they cautiously let go of her soft hands and happily headed directly straight for the massive sandbox. She quietly joined Owen entirely on the wooden bench, highly intentionally maintaining a significant amount of physical space completely between them. She absolutely did not speak at first. Neither did he. They simply sat there, completely in silence, both intensely watching the two tiny girls happily dig and aggressively build with cheap plastic shovels, working completely silently right next to each other, exactly as highly identical twins often flawlessly do. Exactly as if they profoundly shared a highly private, secret language that absolutely no one else could ever completely understand. They absolutely still do not know exactly who you are, Selena finally stated. Her beautiful voice was incredibly low, almost completely drowned out entirely by the loud, happy sounds of active play completely around them. To them, you are absolutely just a highly random man from the street, a complete, total stranger. I completely, profoundly understand, Owen stated, his piercing eyes absolutely still violently glued entirely to the tiny girls. I absolutely expect nothing. You will absolutely have to be incredibly patient. They are highly intelligent, highly observant, but they absolutely do not blind trust easily. He nodded slowly. They are absolutely beautiful. Selena glanced completely sideways at him. They are absolutely ours. You simply arrogantly chose absolutely not to know that before. I was completely, catastrophically wrong, he stated incredibly simply. And I am so profoundly sorry. I absolutely cannot magically undo it. But I desperately want to actively show them something completely different now to show you. A highly comfortable silence peacefully settled completely between them again. But it absolutely didn't feel anywhere near as incredibly heavy as before. One of the tiny girls, Sky, Selena had explicitly told him in a highly brief text message, cautiously approached, intensely looking at Owen, entirely from a safe distance. He gracefully crouched completely down to perfectly match her eye level, incredibly careful not to get way too aggressively close, and offered a warm smile. "Hello," he stated incredibly softly. She absolutely did not reply. She simply stared intensely at him, with a highly serious expression of deep concentration, exactly as if she were meticulously, fiercely measuring the exact shape of his handsome face, the striking color of his piercing eyes, the exact way his deep voice resonated. "Do you desperately want some massive help with your beautiful sandcastle?" he asked gently, pointing directly at her half-built sandy mound. She nodded incredibly slowly. Then, she smoothly turned around and happily walked right back without saying a single word, quickly looking completely over her tiny shoulder exactly once, just to actively ensure he was successfully following her. For the absolute entire next hour, Owen sat completely in the filthy sand, aggressively building highly crooked castles, frantically digging deep tunnels, and actively feigning massive astonishment every single time they aggressively buried a plastic toy and magically discovered it again. The tiny girls absolutely didn't speak very much, but they absolutely didn't run away. They happily handed him cheap shovels. They laughed hysterically whenever he actively made highly ridiculous animal noises. They excitedly pointed at flying birds and aggressively demanded that he correctly guess their specific names. It absolutely wasn't a massive, profound connection. Not yet. But it was something incredibly, beautifully close to a true, genuine beginning. Selena quietly observed entirely from the wooden bench, her arms loosely crossed, her beautiful face highly unreadable. But occasionally, she softly smiled. Not because she desperately wanted to, but entirely because she literally could not physically help it. When it was officially time to finally leave, the tiny girls happily hugged each other entirely to successfully say goodbye, exactly as they absolutely always did. As they slowly walked away, Gracie quickly turned entirely around and waved highly shyly directly at Owen. It wasn't a massive wave, just a tiny, highly tentative one. Exactly as if to loudly say, "You successfully passed the absolute first massive test." Selena absolutely did not speak as she securely buckled them entirely into their car seats. It was absolutely unnecessary. The exact, intense way she looked directly at him as she smoothly slid completely into the driver's seat explicitly said, significantly more than any heavy words ever could have. "You are absolutely not forgiven. Not yet. But perhaps you are absolutely no longer a terrifying stranger." Owen remained completely alone in the massive parking lot long after the cheap car had entirely driven away, intensely watching as the bright sun beautifully filtered completely through the tall trees, and physically feeling, for the absolute first time in agonizing years, exactly as if something massive completely inside him was finally, violently awakening. Not toxic guilt, not pathetic regret. Something infinitely better. Something he absolutely hadn't profoundly felt since long before he violently lost her. Perhaps it was absolute hope. Perhaps it was pure, unadulterated love. Or perhaps it was the absolute beautiful beginning of actively becoming the exact kind of powerful man that his beautiful daughters would one day happily run directly toward, entirely, instead of violently running away from. Owen is trying to build a relationship with his twins. What is the sweetest thing a parent has ever done for you? Share below. Earning the title. Over the highly consecutive, beautiful weeks, Owen aggressively began to appear highly regularly directly at the small park. At the local public library, where Selena frequently took the tiny girls entirely for afternoon story time. And sometimes, simply standing completely outside her modest house whenever he was explicitly invited. Sitting peacefully on the wooden porch steps, completely with a massive bag entirely filled with colorful coloring books or tiny, intricate puzzles that he had meticulously chosen entirely himself. He absolutely never arrived entirely unannounced. He absolutely never aggressively stayed way too incredibly long. He flawlessly allowed the tiny girls to completely guide him, and Selena intensely watched him incredibly closely. Absolutely not exactly as a massive test, but entirely because she literally didn't know exactly how to completely stop watching him. For a highly terrifying man who had previously completely violently shut down so incredibly easily, Owen was miraculously becoming incredibly kind, highly intentional, and beautifully, completely present. At absolute first, the tiny girls highly cautiously treated him exactly like a brand new, slightly strange neighbor. They highly cautiously asked complex questions, often entirely through Selena. They were highly curious entirely about his massive luxury car, about whether he fiercely liked green frogs or sweet strawberries, about whether he could successfully tie his massive shoes entirely by himself. But as the beautiful visits became significantly longer and highly consistent, The entire, massive tone completely changed. Owen aggressively began to miraculously become a highly regular, permanent figure. Absolutely not entirely a true father yet, but significantly more than just a pathetic visitor. They happily laughed significantly louder exactly when he arrived. They aggressively ran to proudly show him their highly messy drawings. They confidently climbed directly onto his massive lap, completely without asking. And they happily told him highly nonsensical, chaotic stories that possessed absolutely zero logical sense, but that completely lit his handsome face up exactly like the bright morning sunrise. Then came the highly massive, terrifying conversation entirely about official, legal rights. Owen absolutely did not aggressively bring it up. Selena fiercely did. They were sitting peacefully entirely on her quiet back porch, while the tiny girls were soundly napping completely inside. The baby monitor, softly, quietly buzzing completely between them. A highly gentle, warm spring breeze beautifully moved the sheer curtains directly behind the screen door. You desperately need to officially be directly on their federal birth certificates, she stated incredibly clearly. He blinked rapidly in pure, massive surprise. I absolutely did not expect you to ever explicitly say that. I am absolutely not doing it entirely for you, she stated firmly. I am fiercely doing it entirely because incredibly soon, they will aggressively start actively asking massive questions. Real, highly profound questions. About exactly where you were, why exactly you absolutely weren't there, who exactly you truly are, and exactly when they fiercely do. I desperately want the absolute answer to be 100% honest. He violently swallowed incredibly hard. I desperately want to be completely there for absolutely all of that. Not just for the highly easy, beautiful parts. She nodded fiercely. Then aggressively prove it. Absolutely not just in a federal court, every single damn day. They successfully filed the massive, complex legal documents completely together. It was highly clinical, completely procedural, massive signatures, highly secure identity verifications, a highly stressful, formal hearing entirely with a stern family court judge who meticulously reviewed the massive documents and intensely studied both of them exactly as if they were barely standing upright. But when the elite judge slowly looked up and explicitly asked if either of them desperately had absolutely anything to formally add, Selena fiercely spoke first. I am absolutely not here entirely because I blindly trust incredibly easily, she stated clearly. I am officially here entirely because I have vividly, beautifully seen exactly who he is, miraculously becoming. And I fiercely want my beautiful daughters to flawlessly grow up intimately knowing the exact version of their true father, who is actively here right now. Absolutely not the toxic coward who violently left. The stern judge slowly nodded. And you, Mr. Carlyle? Owen smoothly cleared his highly constricted throat. I was completely, catastrophically wrong. I aggressively acted entirely without thinking. Absolutely without listening. And I have violently lost agonizing years that I can absolutely never, ever recover. But I am absolutely right here now, and I will fiercely be here tomorrow, and every single beautiful day directly after that, because they are completely mine, and I desperately want to aggressively earn the absolute right to finally be theirs. The elite judge formally, legally, granted him his absolute parental rights. There was absolutely no massive fanfare or loud applause that highly emotional day. But Owen confidently walked out of the massive courthouse with the exact kind of highly quiet, violently trembling, deep breath that perfectly occurs exactly when a shattered heart, finally, miraculously, begins to function flawlessly again. That exact same night, Selena graciously permitted him to gently put the tiny girls completely to bed. He beautifully read them a magical story entirely about a grumpy bear who literally couldn't successfully hibernate, and ultimately ended up beautifully discovering the bright spring. The tiny girls happily snuggled directly on each side of his massive body, their beautiful eyes halfway closed, their tiny, incredibly soft fingers wrapped completely around his large thumb. When he finally finished the beautiful story, Gracie sleepily asked him if he would absolutely come back the very next day. "I will absolutely be here," he whispered incredibly softly. "Every single morning." Selena was standing perfectly still, entirely in the heavy doorway, intensely watching. She absolutely did not utter a single word. But when he slowly turned completely around to safely leave, she smoothly reached completely out entirely without thinking, and highly lightly, gently brushed her soft fingers completely against his massive arm. It absolutely wasn't complete forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the absolute very first time she had physically, gently touched him in exactly 4 agonizing years. And that highly subtle gesture profoundly meant something massive, something highly complex that neither of them could perfectly explain, but that both of them fiercely felt. Something incredibly real, something highly fragile, something beautifully beginning. Interactive question. Selena let Owen put the girls to bed. Do you think their relationship will ever turn romantic again? Share your thoughts. The folder of truth. Heavy rain fell continuously with a highly steady, depressing rhythm that gloomy afternoon, aggressively beating completely against the massive windows of Owen's luxury office while he stared blankly entirely at his glowing computer screen. The massive city far below was entirely blurred in thick gray, and for the absolute first time, in agonizing years, massive corporate work literally could not magically distract his brilliant mind. His chaotic thoughts were deeply, violently tangled entirely with agonizing memories. The exact, painful ones he had aggressively pushed completely away for way too incredibly long. It had officially been almost exactly 2 beautiful months since the federal court had permanently recognized his absolute parental rights. And absolutely everything had completely, beautifully changed. The tiny girls now happily, loudly called him Daddy, completely without a single ounce of hesitation. They aggressively drew highly colorful pictures exclusively for him, and violently ran directly into his massive arms the absolute second he arrived. But absolutely still, something highly massive and unresolved heavily lingered entirely between him and Selena. Something completely unspoken, and it aggressively gnawed at his soul significantly more silently than toxic guilt, but infinitely deeper than pure regret. Later that exact same week, Selena surprisingly, highly unexpectedly appeared directly in his massive corporate office. She looked incredibly tired, but absolutely not angry. She confidently walked in, holding a highly official, thick folder securely in her hand, possessing a highly strange, intense expression entirely on her beautiful face. Partial hesitation. Partial, absolute resolution. Owen violently stood up the absolute microsecond he vividly saw her, his heart violently jumping entirely into his throat. She absolutely did not sit down. She simply, smoothly placed the heavy folder directly onto the massive mahogany desk and aggressively pushed it completely toward him. "I accidentally found this exactly while I was actively sorting completely through some highly old, forgotten things," she stated incredibly quietly. "It is entirely from the exact night you violently accused me." He violently hesitated. Then, he incredibly slowly, cautiously opened the heavy folder. Inside were highly pristine copies of massive, internal company memos, fully signed corporate security logs, and a highly printed, lengthy email chain meticulously detailing a massive, highly catastrophic technical accounting error explicitly involving a completely different, highly elite corporate employee. His piercing eyes rapidly scanned the highly official documents, and the absolute, brutal truth violently hit him exactly like a massive, devastating punch directly in the stomach. Selena absolutely had not stolen a single damn penny. The massive missing corporate funds had been entirely part of a highly catastrophic miscommunication and a massive administrative accounting error that someone completely else had maliciously, actively covered up entirely to aggressively protect their own pathetic job. The absolute, undeniable evidence was right there. Completely clear and highly damning. Absolutely not against her, but entirely against the highly toxic corporate system he had arrogantly, blindly trusted significantly more than the beautiful woman he fiercely loved. His ragged breath completely caught exactly as he looked up deeply at her. "Why the hell didn't you violently show me this massive proof before?" She calmly crossed her soft arms, but absolutely not defensively. Her beautiful voice was incredibly quiet and perfectly even. "Because you absolutely didn't ask. Because you absolutely refused to listen. And if I had desperately, frantically handed these exact papers entirely to you that horrific night, would absolutely anything have magically changed?" Owen slowly opened his mouth, then violently closed it again. The absolute, brutal truth hung heavily completely between them, way too incredibly bitter for any pathetic excuses. "I securely kept them," she continued smoothly. "Absolutely not to aggressively prove you catastrophically wrong, but entirely because a tiny part of me absolutely always secretly hoped that you would violently figure it out completely on your own." He sat down incredibly slowly. The massive, crushing weight of exactly what he had brutally done settled infinitely deeper than ever before. This absolutely wasn't just about federal custody or legal rights or even the 4 agonizing lost years. This was entirely about absolute trust. The exact kind of profound trust that absolutely cannot be magically rebuilt with stern court orders or highly scheduled play visits. It was entirely about the exact terrifying moment when he had arrogantly chosen blinding fear completely over pure faith in someone he once fiercely claimed to deeply love. "I was completely, utterly terrified," he finally stated, his voice broken. "Terrified of being catastrophically wrong. Terrified of being maliciously used. I arrogantly allowed that highly toxic fear to violently destroy absolutely everything." Selena stared deeply into his eyes, and for the absolute first time in an incredibly long time, she vividly, clearly saw the massive, agonizing pain completely hidden directly behind his imposing fortress. Absolutely no bitter anger. Absolutely no toxic resentment. Just a highly quiet, pure exhaustion. "I violently had to build a complete life entirely out of absolute nothing," she stated softly, while heavily carrying 2 fragile babies, completely, utterly alone. "Do you possess any absolute idea exactly what it truly felt like? To be violently accused of something absolutely unforgivable, and to have absolutely no one genuinely believe in you?" "I absolutely cannot magically fix it," he stated with a highly low, broken voice. "But I fiercely swear to you, I will absolutely never, ever doubt you again for the rest of my entire life." She slowly, thoughtfully, nodded exactly once. Then, after a highly charged, silent moment, she smoothly turned completely around to peacefully leave. Right before she finally reached the heavy door, she completely stopped. "The tiny girls are actively watching us," she stated incredibly softly. "If we genuinely want them to clearly know exactly what true, pure love actually looks like, we desperately have to actively show them, even if we are absolutely still highly confusingly figuring it completely out ourselves." Then, she quietly left, graciously leaving the heavy door, slowly swinging, completely shut, directly behind her. Owen remained completely frozen there for an incredibly long time, intensely staring directly at the highly explosive folder that possessed the massive power to completely change absolutely everything. If only he had simply cared enough to thoroughly read it exactly 4 agonizing years ago. But in that exact, critical microsecond, he profoundly understood something massive that he had absolutely never understood before. True, absolute redemption wasn't entirely just about actively being physically present. It was about taking complete, total responsibility. Absolutely not just for the beautiful outcome, but completely for the massive, devastating wound. That exact night, he absolutely did not bring a massive, expensive toy for the tiny girls. He carefully brought a highly intimate, beautifully handwritten letter directly for Selena. Absolutely not to pathetically apologize again, but to fully, honestly tell the absolute, complete truth entirely about his massive fear, about his catastrophic, pathetic failure, and exactly about how he was completely, fiercely ready. Absolutely not just to become an incredible father, but to actively, miraculously transform into someone completely, undeniably worthy of the beautiful life he had almost violently, permanently lost. The building of a home, the warm summer beautifully arrived incredibly softly, and perfectly with it came a highly comfortable rhythm that neither Owen nor Selena ever genuinely expected to magically feel again. The tiny girls now happily, eagerly looked entirely for Owen with the exact same, pure naturalness with which they happily sought Selena. Their beautiful, chaotic days were entirely filled with highly energetic games, endless, curious questions, and tiny, beautiful rituals that completely made his massive presence feel incredibly permanent. He had highly discreetly rented a small, comfortable townhouse, just exactly 10 short minutes completely away from her modest house. Absolutely not because he desperately needed it, but entirely because he fiercely wanted the tiny girls to profoundly feel that he was absolutely, completely close. Incredibly close enough to magically appear for afternoon story time, to happily pick them completely up from the busy daycare, for the terrifying days when one of them violently woke up with a high fever and simply desperately needed to be fiercely hugged. Owen, previously a highly terrifying man, known absolutely only for his massive, towering skyscraper offices and his absolute ruthless control inside elite boardrooms, now happily, peacefully spent entire, beautiful afternoons aggressively assembling highly complex plastic dollhouses, happily baking slightly undercooked, messy chocolate chip cookies, and loudly, joyfully singing terrible lullabies incredibly out of tune. Selena, highly cautious entirely by primal nature and deeply by protective habit now, absolutely did not violently resist his massive involvement. But she also absolutely did not give in way too incredibly fast. She intensely watched him with a highly quiet, focused attention, meticulously tracking his absolute consistency, his unbreakable patience, the exact, beautiful way he warmly responded to his young daughters when things were incredibly messy, or incredibly loud, or simply beautifully human. She deeply, profoundly noticed exactly how he absolutely no longer grabbed his expensive phone when he was actively with them. Exactly how he happily squeezed his massive frame directly into tiny, cheap plastic chairs and intensely listened to their highly nonsensical, chaotic stories. Exactly as if they were the absolute most important, profound words ever beautifully spoken. He absolutely wasn't playing a pathetic game of being a father. He was miraculously, truly becoming one. Sometimes, Selena graciously allowed him to stay for a warm dinner. At absolute first, it was highly practical. A simple matter of busy schedules, complex logistics, pure convenience. Then, the beautiful moment slowly, magically lengthened just a tiny bit more. She happily helped clean up the kitchen. They peacefully shared hot coffee. They cautiously, warmly talked about the tiny girls, about their busy days, and finally, incredibly softly, about the highly toxic past. He absolutely never defended himself. She absolutely never violently accused him. They simply, beautifully, allowed the heavy air completely between them to peacefully settle with the absolute truth that neither had ever loudly spoken in agonizing years. One quiet night, long after the tiny girls had peacefully fallen fast asleep in their identical matching twin beds, Selena stood perfectly still in the heavy doorway. The modest house was completely, utterly silent, save entirely for the highly comforting hum of the tiny nightlight and the beautiful, soft sound of their peaceful breathing. Owen confidently stood directly by her side with his massive arms loosely crossed. His handsome expression was incredibly soft and completely filled with pure, unadulterated wonder. She happily says that she currently beautifully dreams entirely about massive castles, Selena whispered softly, nodding gently toward Gracie. Massive ones, with towering windows that literally touch the bright sky. I arrogantly used to believe that absolutely all they would desperately want from me would be complex answers, Owen murmured softly. But they are absolutely beautiful stories. They desperately want magical stories. Selena slowly turned completely toward him, her beautiful face highly unreadable. They desperately want you. But they also desperately want absolute security, unbreakable consistency, that you are actively here, absolutely not just for right now, but completely forever. I will absolutely be here, he stated firmly, whatever the massive cost. She slowly nodded, and for one beautiful, massive moment, the physical space completely between them felt significantly less like an impenetrable boundary, and significantly more like an incredibly beautiful, true beginning. Later that exact same week, Gracie happily climbed directly onto his massive lap and curiously asked exactly why he absolutely didn't happily live in the exact same house as them. Her tiny voice was incredibly curious, absolutely not deeply sad. But the massive question struck him incredibly, profoundly, deeply. He absolutely did not answer immediately. Then, Selena, sitting completely on the absolute other side of the cozy room, peacefully folding warm laundry, slowly looked up and answered incredibly softly. Sometimes, adults desperately need massive amounts of time to completely understand exactly where their true, absolute home actually is. Gracie happily accepted the profound answer, snuggling significantly deeper directly into Owen's strong arms, already peacefully drifting off completely to sleep. That exact night, Owen stayed significantly longer. Long after Selena had gently tucked the tiny girls into bed, they sat peacefully entirely on the back wooden steps, completely in silence. The bright moon, beautifully peeking completely out from behind incredibly thin white clouds. I arrogantly used to believe that true, absolute love meant making massive, highly dramatic promises, he stated softly. But perhaps it is simply entirely about quietly, flawlessly showing up every single damn day. Selena looked deeply at him. Are you actively learning? I am desperately trying, he replied. You are absolutely doing it, she responded softly. She absolutely did not say anything more. But when she finally stood up to safely go inside, she absolutely did not leave with the exact same, highly cautious rigidity as before. Instead, she completely stopped. She slowly looked completely back exactly once, and she beautifully smiled. Absolutely not highly politely, not intensely cautiously, but with absolute, pure warmth. And that tiny, highly unexpected, beautiful smile violently stayed completely with him the entire long night. Exactly like a massive, heavy door magically opening completely after agonizing years of being permanently, violently locked shut. Owen and Selena are finally communicating. Do you think true love can overcome such a massive betrayal? Let us know. The wish and the reunion. The bright golden morning of the tiny girl's absolute 4th birthday miraculously arrived with beautiful warm light, aggressively pouring completely through the large windows, and the incredibly chaotic, joyful sound of tiny feet violently hitting the hardwood floor. The modest house was already completely, beautifully filled entirely with massive balloons, colorful ribbons, and the incredibly sweet, mouth-watering aroma of a massive vanilla cake that Owen had highly imperfectly, but incredibly proudly, baked entirely from scratch the previous late night. He had absolutely never, ever decorated a single party in his entire elite life. But now, he was aggressively tying bright streamers entirely to cheap chairs and frantically blowing up massive balloons until his massive hands physically ached. Absolutely all of it, entirely, because his beautiful daughters had enthusiastically, specifically requested the absolute prettiest birthday ever. Selena arrived incredibly early, happily carrying a massive bag entirely filled with highly complex, handmade paper crowns and a large box of fresh, sweet strawberries. Her beautiful eyes miraculously lit up the absolute microsecond she vividly saw exactly what Owen had magically done to the cozy living room. It absolutely wasn't highly polished. It absolutely wasn't Pinterest perfect, but it was incredibly bright, highly joyful, completely filled with massive, pure care, and incredibly, undeniably real. The tiny girls violently sprinted completely in, wearing their highly sparkling, matching birthday dresses, laughing hysterically entirely as they spun wildly around and aggressively demanded that absolutely everyone closely admire the bright sparkles. They both fiercely hugged Owen, absolutely first. Then, they aggressively ran directly toward Selena, entirely covering her with wet kisses and happily pulling her completely down to help them safely put on their beautiful crowns. For the absolute first time in exactly 4 agonizing years, it profoundly, genuinely felt exactly like a true, complete family celebration. Absolutely not a highly tense arrangement, not a pathetic compromise. A highly real, beautifully shared, massive joy. The happy guests arrived in massive, chaotic waves. Friendly neighbors, energetic preschool friends, Selena's warm cousins, and even one of Owen's absolute oldest, most loyal friends, entirely from elite university, who had surprisingly flown in completely after hearing that something incredibly massive was beautifully happening in his life. The small backyard violently transformed into a massive playground, completely filled with highly colorful streamers, messy face painting, tiny plastic tables, and a highly noisy bubble machine that aggressively ran almost completely non-stop. The tiny girls happily bounced entirely between their two proud parents, aggressively dragging them completely into silly games, enthusiastically handing out bright stickers, and proudly, loudly announcing to absolutely anyone who would actively listen, "That is my amazing daddy, and that is my beautiful mommy." Owen intensely noticed the exact beautiful way Selena laughed significantly more freely now, the exact way her beautiful eyes warmly lingered directly on him, significantly longer than before, without violently tensing. Exactly how she absolutely no longer violently flinched completely at close proximity or highly quiet, intimate moments. Long after the highly chaotic games, the massive cake, and the loud, completely out-of-tune chorus of Happy Birthday, the exhausted children happily gathered entirely in a small circle directly on a plaid picnic blanket. And Gracie suddenly, confidently stood up, proudly holding a heavily folded, slightly crumpled piece of cheap paper. She whispered something incredibly secretive directly into her sister's tiny ear. Skye solemnly, fiercely nodded. "We made a massive, highly important wish," Gracie loudly announced, aggressively gripping the cheap paper tightly with both tiny hands. "It is entirely for Mommy and Daddy." Skye proudly stood directly beside her and aggressively added, "It is incredibly, highly important." Owen and Selena rapidly exchanged a highly intense, slightly nervous look, but they said absolutely nothing. They waited patiently. Gracie incredibly carefully, meticulously unfolded the paper, and with the absolute profound seriousness that only a tiny 4-year-old child could successfully muster, she loudly read it completely out loud. "We fiercely wish that Mommy and Daddy happily live completely together in the exact same house, so that we absolutely never ever have to say goodbye anymore." To say, the entire crowded backyard went completely, utterly silent for a massive moment. Some friendly parents laughed incredibly softly, deeply moved, while others highly politely looked entirely away, graciously giving massive space to something so incredibly personal and highly, beautifully raw. Owen's massive heart violently clenched tight. He looked deeply, intensely at Selena. She was blinking incredibly rapidly, desperately, frantically trying not to violently cry. Significantly later, that exact night, long after the highly chaotic party had officially ended and the absolute last of the noisy guests had finally gone, Owen and Selena sat peacefully entirely at the small kitchen table. The modest house was completely silent once again. The tiny girls had peacefully fallen deeply asleep directly next to each other, inside a highly impressive improvised massive fort, constructed entirely out of soft sofa cushions and heavy blankets. Owen gently held the crumpled wish paper directly in his massive hand, highly smoothly smoothing it completely out with his large thumb. "I absolutely fiercely promise you, I did absolutely not ask them to write that," he stated incredibly softly. "I completely know," Selena replied softly. "It is exactly what they desperately want." "And exactly what about you?" he asked, absolutely not daring to look directly at her. She took a massive, incredibly deep breath, her soft fingers gently, rhythmically, tracing the smooth edge of her coffee mug. "I genuinely, honestly, never thought we would ever magically return from exactly what violently happened. But intensely seeing you completely with them, actively watching you miraculously become this incredibly powerful, good man, I profoundly think that perhaps we absolutely didn't permanently lose absolutely everything. Perhaps we simply violently hit pause. He slowly looked up directly at her. There was absolutely zero toxic fear entirely on her beautiful face. Absolutely zero freezing distance, just absolute, terrifying clarity, and something incredibly soft, something exactly like a highly quiet, beautiful acceptance. I am absolutely not aggressively asking for absolutely everything, he stated firmly. Not today. Just exactly one single chance to fiercely build exactly what they clearly see in us. Selena slowly stood up and walked confidently directly toward the quiet living room, exactly where the tiny girls peacefully lay heavily tangled, completely in warm blankets. Their tiny hands, absolutely still, fiercely intertwined, even in deep sleep. She called incredibly softly, completely, over her beautiful shoulder. Then, perhaps it is officially time that we completely stop living in two entirely separate houses. Owen absolutely did not move immediately. He simply, intensely watched her, his massive heart violently beating. Absolutely not with toxic panic, but with something infinitely softer. Absolute certainty. He confidently stood up, walked completely over to stand perfectly by her side, and completely together, they looked deeply down at their beautiful daughters, at the exact two tiny human beings who had miraculously pulled them entirely out of the toxic abyss and completely unknowingly, brilliantly taught them exactly how to fiercely try again. There was absolutely no massive dramatic speech, no highly passionate, movie-style kiss, no massive, cinematic moment. Just exactly two broken people standing perfectly together. Finally, completely ready to successfully share the massive weight of the toxic past and the beautiful, unbreakable promise of exactly what could absolutely still beautifully be so. It was incredibly quiet, and it was absolutely perfectly enough. The philosophical epilogue, the absolute ending of this powerful story, is incredibly profound, entirely in its beautiful quietness. It absolutely does not arrogantly rely on massive, highly dramatic plot twists or a flawlessly perfect instant reconciliation. Instead, it fiercely earns its massive emotional weight entirely through deep emotional growth, pure humility, and the highly active and fierce choice to aggressively rebuild exactly what was violently broken. Owen's massive transformation absolutely isn't sudden or magical. It is incredibly slow, highly real, and profoundly, deeply human. He absolutely does not arrogantly win Selena completely back with massive amounts of money or highly publicized empty apologies. He wins her completely back, entirely, with absolute presence, unbreakable consistency, and the fierce, unadulterated willingness to fully own his catastrophic past, entirely without toxically defending it. Selena's highly brave, massive decision to graciously allow him completely back in is equally fiercely valiant. Absolutely not out of pathetic weakness, but completely out of unbreakable strength. Fiercely choosing to beautifully forgive. Absolutely not because she blindly forgot, but entirely because she vividly, beautifully, saw exactly who he had miraculously become. What completely makes the absolute ending so incredibly satisfying is that it absolutely does not offer a highly fake, toxic fantasy. It flawlessly offers pure, unadulterated hope. It powerfully, brilliantly shows you that heavily broken people can completely change. That true, absolute love can miraculously survive even directly through massive, toxic betrayal. And that sometimes, the absolute most highly unexpected, beautiful second chances are the exact ones we are the absolute most terrified of desperately wanting. The tiny, identical twin girls, completely without knowing it, flawlessly become the absolute, beating heart of the entire story. Absolutely not just because they miraculously represent a massive, hidden truth, but entirely because they profoundly remind both damaged adults exactly what it truly means to fiercely love completely without toxic conditions, and to blindly, beautifully believe in the absolute possibility of pure, profound healing. It is a highly silent, absolute triumph. And those specific triumphs, I profoundly believe, are the absolute most permanent, lasting ones of all. What an incredibly emotional, powerful journey of true redemption. What did you guys fiercely think of Owen's massive transformation? Do you genuinely believe second chances can beautifully heal a broken past? Tell me exactly what you would have done in Selena's shoes in the comments below. If you absolutely loved this beautiful story of hope and family, please smash that like button, share it with someone who deeply believes in the power of change, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible, life-changing stories. See you in the next video.